In our final presentation of the day, our two speakers will tell us how emerging CPG brands are using alternative data sources and just-in-time execution to drive sales. Joining me now are two executives from Survey.com, John Eric Penicad, Chief Operating Officer, and Katharina Haynes Bethea, Senior Director of Survey.com. The podium is yours.
Thanks. Really great to be here, guys. My name's Katharina. I recently joined Survey.com, and I'm really excited to share with you guys today how CPG companies are taking crowdsourcing to the next level. So if you've worked in retail or with a consumer goods company before, you know that executing at retail can be difficult. So that challenge of getting your product on shelf and executed correctly exists and will continue to exist for a while. We all know that brands face common issues such as in-stocks, signing, and execution of special promotions and events. And as you see here, one of this issue that we have highlighted is an in-stock issue. The store may or may not get around to restocking that product that day, and if your product is not on shelf, it can't be sold. Emerging brands face sort of a double-edged sword. They have to get into the retailer first, and then they have to perform. And oftentimes, they have to perform at shelf without the resources that a lot of their large counterparts have at their disposal. So let's just take a step back for a moment and define emerging brands. So emerging brands are essentially new entrants to a category. Sometimes they actually challenge what that category can mean. And of late, a lot of these new entrants are actually purpose-driven brands. So brands that, as you see here, tend to find themselves in the healthy food or the healthy food atmosphere or some other purpose behind them. And while their founders are really passionate about their brand, sometimes they're just not necessarily well educated on how retail actually works. So at the same time, these brands are fighting to get their name known. They're fighting for distribution at shelf as well as consumer adoption. And a lot of times, because they're not recognized, they're not prioritized in store for execution, and most stores are stretched with store labor, hours, and execution. So what are these smaller or emerging brands to do? So the first thing they can do is they can do nothing. A lot of times they think just getting accepted by the retailer and getting on shelf will automatically drive sales, and they'll just live with the results. We all know that's not the best way to move forward. So they have two options in front of them. One, they can get a broker, and that broker can help them to some extent at shelf, but they can also be pricey, and their reach can be limited. The other option these emerging brands have is to build and maintain a field team of their own. This can also be quite expensive, but also limiting in terms of the reach if you think about how many stores these brands are going to be in. And then at the same time, it can take a lot of time to get this field team executed and up to speed so that they can actually perform in field. So crowdsourcing is a great solution to this issue. So essentially crowdsourcing is when a company takes a large function that was once executed by their own employees and outsources it to a network of people. Crowdsourcing is actually not new. We've seen it in food delivery. We also see it in transportation. And to some extent, we also see it in home improvement. The next level of crowdsourcing, though, which John Eric is going to tell us about, is allowing these emerging brands to actually do more than just get their product on shelf. They're using it to drive presence at shelf as well as drive sales. J.E.?
Hey, everyone. I appreciate you taking time to listen. Hopefully we can go under the hood a little bit and get off the deck and take away some interesting insights about how these brands are tackling these issues and going beyond crowdsourcing. So that's my goal for this section. We're going to do 3 mini case studies to give you a feel for what's really happening out there. And so the first thing I want to do is give you a sense of the scope and reach and how prevalent this is happening and what we're seeing. And if you bear with me, we are going to switch screens here, and we're going to take a look at one of our tools where we see and help facilitate essentially what is a profile of gig economy across the U.S. executing on behalf of our clients. So if we go ahead and load for this 3-day period here this week, we'll get a sense of the scope of what's happening in 3 days. And I think it provides a valuable perspective. What you're going to see is that these brands are executing across the entire U.S., both in busy metros and in the sticks, and they're doing that in all channels. Every one of these numbers on my screen here that just loaded up is a retail location. Here, I'll zoom in. And whether it's a grocery store, a convenience store, an independent, a mass, a Walmart, they're getting support across a variety of functions and needs. Okay, and so the first, let me just flip back for you. One second. All right. The first case study that we're going to talk about will be essentially around, being a new entrant into retail. And we've got a brand called Soylent, and if you haven't tried it, it's quite good. And it's essentially a meal in a bottle, a meal substitute in a bottle. And so they built up a great brand, direct to consumer online, and are now entering retail. And so you can imagine the challenges that they deal with to get placed and get promoted and get, properly ordered and all those sorts of things. And so we're going to take a little look at what some of that looks like and talk to some of the challenges that they face and how they're meeting those. And it just takes a second to switch over here. So we're going to dive in. All right, so down in the Austin area, this is one of the markets that they're expanding into. They're using this distributed force at H-E-B and a grocery. And if we dive in and we go all the way to the shelf, we're going to see some interesting things. So obviously the first confirmation is about, are we there? Are we placed correctly? Are we faced correctly? But over time, the shift becomes, towards communication and requests and looking for second placements and those sorts of things. I can tell you that one of the challenges they faced early on is that, many store category managers misinterpreted, because they sell their product cool and also warm. They sometimes misinterpret that what the shelf life is of the product when it's in the on a cold shelf. And so, one of the things they do is they educate and, make sure that they know that, hey, this is a shelf-stable product, and, you can order it at appropriate levels to ensure there are no out-of-stocks. But as we go through this visit, and I let you under the hood here, we can see there's a variety of steps that they're taking. There's critical education points that are getting shared when necessary. Every rep visit is being documented. They're looking at the category where they're placed. They're essentially doing an audit of each SKU regarding price, promotion, In this case, they're looking at inventory levels, that sort of thing. And any request that they had made on the previous visit or previous visits, they're going to circle back and confirm if what was agreed upon happened. And so here's an example, as I scroll down, where they were able to generate a second placement, so outside of the cooler, and you can kind of see it here, which is great. I think one of the takeaways here, and obviously there's merchandising actions, is it's not enough for a brand to tackle or admire and just audit the challenges in the supply chain. They really have to be taking action to drive sales and to get a return on that investment. And to do that, obviously, requires that you're capturing the details of what actions and what results are coming out of that workforce, whether it's their own field team or a distributed one where they're leveraging the gig economy. And so I guess that's an important takeaway there. Now let's flip. We'll move back over here. So the next example will take a little different tact and come from a data perspective. And so let me show you what one of our bar companies looks like when they do that. So what you're seeing here is the result of a campaign where we helped a bar organization leverage the profiled crowd, right, to sell in their product across a footprint that is heavy franchisee. So obviously, this challenge occurs even in a corporate structure. Oftentimes at the store level, the first order has to get kicked off there, but is certainly prevalent in the independent and or franchisee footprint, where you absolutely need to get the buy-in and that first order generated at the store level. And so what's interesting is obviously we're taking actions with this workforce, but there's very valuable data that gets generated at the shelf, in the store, data that many of these brands, don't have distribution data. They may not have scan data, but in between at the aisle, there's very valuable data. And so here's an example of that same visits that we do inside with technology for every time a rep enters a location. Not only are we monitoring and tracking and coaching and the actions being taken, but we're generating data that can get reported on, and here's an example of that. And so if you can see my screen, you see that our client over time drove their presence and sold in and generated that first order and confirmed that it had happened. And in addition to that, they can see what the category looks like and what else is going on in that category. And so I think that's an interesting perspective. The second point here that we're looking at is, obviously the distribution of presence of their flavors, various SKUs. And, that may be another priority number 2 behind it. And you can see over time what they were able to accomplish. Now, part of what's important, I think, is that you don't want to be blind when you're spending against these objectives, and you may decide, let's pull back in one market, let's pull back in one retailer, let's invest more. We like the results, let's continue on a certain objective down a certain path. So obviously the visibility, the transparency, and the ability to measure against how this gig workforce is performing is critical. All right. So the next mini case study that we wanted to touch on today was trade marketing, right? So trade marketing is an important lever for sales, and I think traditionally, one of the big challenges is simple things. If it gets executed off schedule, the impact and the return on the investment is significant. Every day where you're not executed, you don't get the benefit of that investment. But obviously, it goes beyond that. We've seen how important communicating at the store level is, and if you're really clever about it, you're in advance of the upcoming promotional period and that investment, you're communicating about the promotion. The knowledge and the words and the promotion, they don't travel like you might think, all the way down to the right store personnel. And so, an important component of executing a trade marketing is communication and anticipating the orders that are required in order to deliver on that promotion, and obviously, executing on that. So now we're going to take under the hood again, and we're going to take a look at what that means in live here. So here's an example of a little trade marketing campaign and for a snack company. And I know it's small, but I think it's worth taking a look at sort of the level of detail, that's required to really make sure you're getting your bang for your buck. So what you see here is, obviously a dashboard that the brand's able to look at and sort of ensure and measure that the objectives are being met of their team here, this distributed gig team. And so they get the visibility, not unlike what we looked at when we went out and looked at a visit for Soylent, but they get it at their fingertips. They can literally take the cliff notes. They can dive all the way down to the store visit, to every action and every step that was taken, and they can also look at various slices, and components of their campaign. So this was a promotion inside some convenience stores here, and you can see we've got a floor display component. There's a shelf component that's being executed. And again, I want to make it clear, this brand is not using the crowd to audit the execution. They're actually using it as an extension of their team to walk the promotional materials into the locations, to place them and document and communicate with the store employees. So hopefully that's coming across. And this is just the output in real time of what happened in those stores. And obviously a little roll-up and summary about some of the data that was collected as a derivative, of the visit with regards to some stocking levels and, floor display presence and those sorts of things. All right. It may make sense to open it up for any questions at this point, and then we'll continue. We're also going to have some questions at the end, but certainly if there are any questions, let's see if John can facilitate those.
Okay, I don't see any coming in right now, so we'll just hopefully by the end there will be some.
Sounds good. All right.
Oh, there's one just come in. Oh, one just came in. Ask and you shall receive, right? Please clarify a step-by-step process of how crowdsourcing could be used in a given situation.
Okay. So let me give you an example of what's happening and what we see, right? As what we do for these brands is we're facilitating this group of reps, of merchandisers across the U.S. These are independent contractors that have been profiled on our platform, and they share all various data and experience. But more importantly, even than what their past is, we track what it is they're willing to be trained on, obviously the type of work they're willing to do, and the times and days that they do it. So these are people that have a job for the most part, large and large, are all different types of people, from a mom, a dad, a millennial, a veteran. But what's the most common theme is they are looking for additional work, but they need the flexibility and the independence that the gig economy provides them. And so we essentially, on behalf of all these brands, we build profiles and manage the entire network against their needs. So the profiles include everything about them as an individual, their resume, their experience, their desires, all those things. But I think just as importantly, their willingness to be certified in a variety of needs that our clients also have. Not every need is the same. We have clients that look to the crowd to support selling, like I showed you, and help with their distribution issues. And obviously, we've looked already at help with executing trade marketing. But it goes beyond that into representing them at resets. And we're going to look at other examples. We're going to look at engaging with consumer as well. Anything inside those four walls that they need. And there are folks that are very good at 3-hour build out of a Super Bowl display. And there are other folks that would never do that, but are fantastic at engaging with consumers and running a demo. So the importance is the ability to organize and manage the data, and so that you can then segment that reach, segment those reps, and then map them to the appropriate reps for any given need on any given time. The next step is you have to be able to train them. So obviously we use technology to say, okay, you've proven that you're appropriate for this, and you said you're willing and able to perform this program. Well, we need to arm you and educate you and quiz you, or we need you to do a ride-along, or whatever the requirements are to prepare you to act as an extension of the team. So from start to finish, there's obviously a number of steps that happen. Fortunately, we've built out a database, right, of last year we crossed 500,000 profiles on the platform of people that are looking for part-time work in stores, not driving an Uber and someone in their back seat, not this, that, and the other, but they really would like to execute locally at retail. And, we draw from that and find the appropriate people, and then we managed obviously their execution and their training and so on and so forth. So hopefully I gave you a sense of the steps involved as clients are doing this. This isn't dissimilar to if you're managing a field team. It's the same. There's a reason there are technology providers that allow you to start to engage with your field team and monitor what they're doing and those sorts of things, because it's critical. It's critical just whether they're an employee or a contractor. It's critical that you know exactly what's happening and what's not, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in order to both have valid data and valid results that you can invest against. So, hopefully there are lessons to be taken away from that.
Another question, what are the economics? Is this for small growing brands as well as large?
That's a great question. So the economics are basically time and complexity of the task being executed or the visit requirements. So what happens is having done thousands and over the years here, we take the need and we translate it so that we can have a performance-based model. We translate it into essentially a visit cost. Okay, and so the visit costs are predefined based on the time and complexity required, whether that's building out a display or engaging and selling a category manager or something else. And so they can range. We have programs where folks are enhancing their team and they're looking for continuity. They're looking for representation, and they may start out a little heavy weekly and then move it to quarterly, whatever it is, and it may be across a channel or a retailer, and it's recurring and they ongoing, and it may be a $14 visit every time that rep is going in there based on that spec. Now, it's not a broker model. Right? It's not about a rep who goes on a route and to build efficiencies we put, so how many clients on that rep can they do while they're in there so that there's a margin. The efficiency is that it's in-store time, that these are local reps that are being profiled and trained. There is no travel time. There is no out-of-store time. And so time and complexity is still efficient even though it's one-to-one in its execution. A couple of exceptions on cost. So there's a large use of this platform in the world of demo, engaging with consumers at retail. Those tend to be 3 to 4 hours, and they are hourly. Same, we're going to take a look next, so it's a good lead-in, but same visibility, transparency, all the things that you do to take advantage, but it's an hourly rate. So that in this case, it's $30 an hour. But another example is in the world of resets, whether we're helping a retailer or representing a manufacturer. They tend to be 4 or 8 hour shifts, and those are also hourly, and depends on the scale and scope. So hopefully that helps when you think about cost. I think part of the benefit and how folks can augment their field teams. We're very pro field team based on what we see, but is the ability to ramp up and ramp down in real time and not have the investment and management that goes with it. Obviously, performance-based model means if a rep hustles across a target, or if they walk slowly, they don't make more money than if they hustle. So you know exactly what you're spending and you know what you're getting. And the reps also know exactly what they are expected to do for it to be deemed a valid visit, and they know exactly what they're going to make before they leave the house. So it's a good model for a growing segment of the gig economy and a growing segment of manufacturers. I think part of the question was the types of brands, and we will talk about that, but we see the full range of startups with new brands, large organizations with new brands, large organizations with old brands that are understanding how this fits into and the problems it solves or the improvements it performs, given how they go to market.
Okay.
All right, so last mini case study, and then we'll try to think through some of and we've covered some thanks to the questions, but we'll think through some of the takeaways, is consumer engagement, right? And so I don't know, everyone's experience on today that are listening, but it's a big investment. When you demo and engage with consumers, it's a big marketing spend, and so it is exceptionally important for everyone, but certainly for an emerging brand, that they're really getting the top return for that spend. And in order to do that, they have to understand. Well, they have to get past the basics, right? So they have to know that the visits are happening. They need transparency. They need accountability. They don't want to find out that actually only 60% of the demos even occurred. It's pretty tough to win. But then beyond that, they have to make the most of that investment. And so that can go beyond just engaging with consumers, and that can go beyond simply, getting them to buy, getting into the cart, getting them to try. And so obviously having the ability to do that is important. So let's go and talk through that a little bit more. Thanks for bearing with me. Okay, so again, maybe not the best format, but I love getting off of PowerPoints. I think it gets more real. So here's a dashboard, and again, another example of a brand. If you've never had it, ice cream, give it a shot. I think you'll like it. But what you see here is that same level of accountability and visibility applies across all the investments and actions happening at the last mile. And so, it's not that, a brand is going to look at every visit and every picture. That's not the point. But it is good to have it, and oftentimes there is value in a deep dive. The deep dive can be information and data that gets taken to the retailer as part of a conversation. It can be obviously go inside of product and marketing, and whether that's consumer feedback or all those sorts of things. So hopefully there's a takeaway there. So let's take so obviously there's a view of, in this case, about 92% of the consumers had never heard of the brand. So this is the high level sort of takeaway from this specific small campaign, number of locations here. But obviously it's the data in terms of inventory and things like that, the number of demo sales, inventory levels, all those things are more important really outside of a dashboard to put them up against your sales data if you have it, and segment stores and things like that. And so they export this data down to the store level so they can really use it. But again, you can see every visit, the entire visit is there to the extent that they can use that data, and we can dive into one. Okay. And whether it's understanding that the person was dressed appropriately, or what the presence of the shelf, right? And then obviously the data collected all come into play on this. But I think, again, what's important is once you're comfortable that you have quality data and you know what's happening and where it's happening down to the store, it really allows you to do a little bit more with the data. And so let me show you an example of that. So this is a demo client, right? And what you're seeing, and albeit a tricky format for today, but down at the bottom, I'll describe it for you, are each of the store locations that they're selling their product at across various regions. And then in red, so at least there's a visual here, are the demos, stores that were demoed, and you can obviously very clearly see the impact happening of those demos. That's a nice snapshot view. What then obviously becomes even more important is when you start to segment up the stores and measure it, and your CFO or your director of finance starts to think about what are the implications at the day of level given the spend, what are the implications on the intangibles, how much are we spending beyond what was sold to market. Okay. Any questions? Those were the three mini cases we wanted to cover in order to make it real. And I just want to open that up to questions, and obviously we're going to try to do a little bit of a recap.
Sure. Another question that came up was, this is a pretty basic one, how do you find the crowd with which to conduct crowdsourcing?
That's a great question. So fortunately for us, it's an interesting story. So Survey.com was in the retail and intelligence business for 20 years. Survey was a pioneer at moving research to the web, and to do that, we basically opted in consumers to share information about themselves via the web and get paid for that information. Everything about themselves, what they make, where they live, who they are, how old they are. And, organizations would engage with them around their preferences for purchasing all kinds of things and why they buy this here versus there and all those sorts of things. And those very clients, so when we moved the entire panel to mobile, things started to change. So now all of a sudden the data that we were collecting, we were able to extend beyond and literally get real-time data at the shelf from those same consumers, but still just collecting data. And it was really the clients that said, look, the data is incredible, but we're admiring all the lost sales and all the problems we have. And by the time we take that data and try to fix it, we need to fix it in real time. And so that's where the concept of organizing the crowd against taking action, not to take a picture, it's nothing wrong with that, but to actually go beyond that, to actually profile and segment and engage and extend your own team. That's where it was born about 7 years ago. And so it was a slow build-out, sort of function by function and skill set by skill set until we got to the point where we had such liquidity that we could enable brands and facilitate so they could do what they do really well, but have access to this incredible network of folks that can take action. And so it's not that we're suggesting the takeaway for today is that everyone should build their own gig network. Obviously, there's a chicken and the egg problem. You have to have liquidity on both sides for it to work. And in retail, it's actually more complex than the high, fast, growth-growing gig organizations you might see. Someone like Uber, it's incredible to see the growth and the impact that it's had on our lives, but it's fairly simplistic. The requirements are, fairly simplistic on both sides of that platform. And when it comes to retail services, it takes longer, and it's as much as we have that large group to pull from. Obviously, if they were all in stores today, we would be the Uber of retail, but they're not. We're pulling from them against our needs and segmenting and executing, and it's growing very rapidly. But at the end of the day, we're able to extend that to folks so they don't have to try to do what isn't possible, which is to sort of build your own network. That said, folks build teams, and we see the finances, the cost of that team, and we know they're valuable. But when we sit down with a CFO of an emerging brand and they say, all right, my 10-person, field team, brand ambassadors, a manager, and a director, is costing $500,000 a year. And when you then sit down with them and say, well, how many manager conversations at how many retailers and how many tag fixes and orders and ghost inventories and pulled inventory, how many samplings, what is it getting you? It's not that it's not valuable, but how can you augment that, and what's the spend translate when you successfully move it to a distributed force like we looked at today? And so that's it.
Okay.
Hey,
well,
this is Katharina. I just wanted to add to that in terms of the question was also, how do we build that crowd? And I think it's really important to note that each one of our reps is rated after each of their jobs. So we're not just randomly picking someone to do a job. They have to be certified to do the job. We keep stats on reliability, on accuracy. And if someone has proven to be unreliable, they're not going to be able to perform any more jobs for us, which is one way that we ensure the quality of the work that's being done and how the brands are being represented in store.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, our last question is, how does crowdsourcing differ from traditional market research in what it helps the retailer or manufacturer to accomplish?
Well, I think if I'm interpreting the question correctly, research, traditionally, you aggregate a bunch of information to gain insights. And what we're talking about today is a little more complex in that it's not about just collecting data. And there are some great crowdsourcing companies that have essentially lowered the cost of visibility at retail. I think Currys and Mobi's. But what we're talking about is about obviously enabling the right person to perform the right task and ensuring that they're appropriate to do that, and leveraging that independent contractor near that location. And so I think that's different from simply collecting data, whether it's at retail or retail intelligence. At the end of the day, you're dealing with labor. You're dealing with issues. You're dealing with people and coaching, and if someone doesn't perform, you take them off. It's a little different.
Okay, thank you.
Kat mentioned how important, how big a role tech and data play for this to work. I just went to the burbs of somewhere and did a nearby users query, and you can see here I can't even remember where we were. I just zoomed in. I think in Montana. I don't even know. There's 135 reps, profiled and with various levels of experience in this little area that I zoomed in on. It's very small, but what you can see here are a couple of things. This Dustin has been certified as an internal certification. We've learned, performance and hands-on training and those sorts of things, as opposed to past experience, are really, really what matters. But internal certifications of audit, installation, selling, restocking, shipment required, meaning they can receive and walk in, advanced audit, and representation. Obviously, if you're got a broad spectrum, then it's going to enable you to do more than someone who might just do audit and something else. And so that determines whether they're available and can put their hat in and say, hey, I would like to do that opportunity. First, they have to be qualified. And they can see Dustin here has done 717 visits in his area. Okay. Let me make sure. Hopefully, you guys are seeing my screen here.
I'm not seeing your screen. Well, there's key takeaways, opportunity.
Okay. Were you guys able to see Dustin?
No.
No. Okay. I can do that real quick, and then we'll wrap. I think it's interesting enough. Okay. So I had zoomed in. Okay. I guess I was in Boulder, and I hit nearby users, and you can see that in this Boulder area, there are 135 opted in, profiled, and to various extents appropriate folks for varied actions. I just had clicked on one of the top ones here, Dustin. And Dustin, a couple of things stand out. One is everything we're doing on very detailed scale is being tracked and rated from a variety of variables on completion, reliability, and quality, but also sort of who Dustin is in terms of training and performance. These internal certifications I had mentioned, that's the audit all the way through, shipment required, all there. And then, obviously you can see that Dustin, with the broad capabilities, has been used on 717 different visits. That's visits for a client. That's not one visit, multiple clients, not a broker model. Okay? Hopefully that helps. And I think we're nearing the end of our time. So to wrap up, just, we had mentioned that while emerging brands certainly, extend and to a great extent use the representation or an extension of their field team, they certainly have other needs. But to be clear, large brands, large organizations are using this platform and this crowd. So I just don't want you to think that it's just a small company. There may be folks in there that are from organizations that are different, and I don't want you to think that that's not applicable. That can be a conversation for another day. So to wrap, I think there's an opportunity that should be considered by folks with regards to extending their team or complementing the existing resources that they have, whether it's a broker or whether maybe there are certain things that just aren't appropriate for their traditional approach. And if we boil it all down, there's a lot there, but if you boil it all down, things we see out of the emerging brands is they quickly learn to be proactive as opposed to reactive in an industry where, oh shit, is usually a starting point for deploying a fix at retail. They're very clever to shift the investment and sort of get more for the same by being a little more proactive around the various programs they're trying to execute. Second thing is they measure everything. Not just, hey, did they do what they said they were going to do, but literally, and what are we accomplishing in those visits? And it's not all good. It's good, it's bad, it's disappointing, it's all of those things. But when you measure them, you can make decisions about, what to continue investing in and what to, maybe shift. And then the last thing is, I think there's a philosophy, or I don't know, maybe not, but a tendency to sort of say, well, listen, it's an incredible footprint. Right? We have clients that have hundreds of thousands of points of distribution, obviously, and you say it's an incredible footprint. Traditionally, I'm going to focus on my top revenue stores and my biggest boxes, and it's just impossible. No one can handle the independent or the C-store channel or the tail. And what we're seeing, and it's certainly prevalent with emerging and increasingly, some of the incumbents, but is there's a lot of value in that tail if you can do it efficiently and measure it a lot. I think the analogy might be the tail of search engines. Right? It used to be people bid on keywords, and then they realized, well, there's a lot of local search. If you add it all up, it's more valuable than in those massive search queries. And so we see the same at retail. So that would be my closing, my closing statement. And I think we're right at the time.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, John Eric. And if you have further questions or need more information, you see his email on the screen. Thank you both very much. That was excellent.